Have you ever met someone who's been hurt to the bone, yet their gaze is steady as stone? You walk into a room. It's not the shouting that tells you to be careful. It's the silence. The silence of someone who's learned how to swallow their tears without anyone noticing. The most dangerous person isn't the one who explodes in anger, but the one who has endured in stillness. For too long, too deeply. And now, they've reached their final limit. So don't look away, because what you're about to hear isn't just a theory from Carl Jung. It's a doorway into a hidden realm within yourself. A world where the empath, so often mistaken for fragile, holds a quiet power strong enough to shake even the most skilled manipulators. Once you understand how Jung unraveled the psyche and the shadow, you'll never look at the empath the same way again. And maybe, just maybe, you'll begin to see yourself differently. 2. Most people don't understand empaths. They mistake their compassion for fragility, their calm for weakness. But beneath that gentle surface is a storm that's been brewing, silently, steadily, for years. Carl Jung once said that within every person lives both light and shadow. And the empath, more than anyone, walks that razor-thin line between the two. They feel everything. They absorb pain that isn't theirs. They give people the benefit of the doubt, even when they shouldn't. Not because they're naive, but because they want to believe in goodness. But there's a point where even the most forgiving soul stops bending. Jung called this psychological tension, the ability to hold opposing forces within. And empaths are masters of it. They can see someone's flaws and still offer kindness. They can feel betrayal but choose grace. That isn't weakness, that's strength wearing soft armor. Yet when an empath has been lied to, manipulated, or used too many times, something within them shifts. You see, Jung believed the most whole individuals are those who faced their own darkness. Not avoided it, not denied it, but integrated it. And that's where the empath becomes dangerous. Because their pain doesn't make them bitter. It makes them aware. They don't lash out. They observe. They don't scream. They study. Every betrayal becomes a lesson. Every manipulation, a red flag cataloged in their emotional archive. And eventually, that archive becomes something extraordinary. Clarity. Jung described this process as individuation, the psychological rebirth into one's true self. For most, it takes years of inner work. For the empath, pain becomes an accelerant. What emerges is not the same soft-hearted person who tolerated too much. What emerges is someone still kind, but no longer compliant. Still open, but no longer exposed. Still loving, but with boundaries carved from fire. They no longer give endlessly. They give selectively. They no longer forgive without thought. They forgive with wisdom. They no longer wait to be seen. They see themselves. This isn't cruelty. This is transformation. When pushed to the edge, the empath doesn't become a narcissist, they become whole. And that wholeness is what makes them powerful. Because they now act, not out of wounds, but out of awareness. While others are still reacting blindly, they are responding, deliberately. And that's what the narcissist never saw coming. The empath who once felt everything now chooses what to feel. The one who once craved connection now cherishes solitude. They haven't lost their heart. They've finally found their backbone. And in the quiet after the storm, they become someone even they didn't know they were capable of being. Previously, we saw how the empath, when pushed to the edge, doesn't break, they awaken. They transform not into someone hardened, but into someone whole. And that's when everything starts to shift. Unlike those who react blindly, the evolved empath doesn't lash out. They don't seek vengeance, nor do they try to inflict the pain they've endured. They don't spiral into chaos. They rise above it. Why? Because they've already fought, and won, the most important battle of all. The battle within themselves. Carl Jung once said that true victory isn't about conquering another person. It's about mastering the parts of yourself that want to drag you into the mud, the anger, the need for validation, the craving to be understood by someone who never intended to understand you. And when the empath reaches that point of inner triumph, that's when the narcissist realizes they've made a fatal misjudgment. Manipulators thrive on predictable responses. They need you to defend yourself, to justify, to plead, to keep the emotional game alive. But when an empath reaches what Jung described as psychological autonomy, the game is over. They no longer chase closure. They no longer explain themselves to deaf ears. They simply stop participating. And that detachment? It isn't numbness. It isn't escape. It's power. A power born not from fear, but from deep understanding. Jung taught that the strongest position in any relationship dynamic is detachment rooted in clarity, not withdrawal rooted in pain. The awakened empath doesn't step away because they're hurt. They step away because they see. And what they see, clearly, maybe for the first time, is how futile it is to negotiate with a lie. This is where everything changes. This is where the power dynamic flips. Jung's research on psychological types revealed something profound. Empaths often possess what he called feeling function dominance. But let's be clear, this doesn't mean they're emotionally unstable or overly sensitive. It means they're finely attuned. They can read energy before words are spoken. They can detect insincerity in a smile. They sense manipulation forming before the manipulator even knows they're doing it. But here's where the twist comes in. When that deep emotional intuition meets earned wisdom, the result is something rare. The empath becomes strategic, no longer driven by wounds, no longer reactive. They begin operating from something Jung described as the transcendent function. The remarkable ability to hold opposing forces, love and hurt, hope and betrayal, truth and illusion, without collapsing. They can face darkness without becoming it. They can choose response over reaction. And that's something most people never master in a lifetime. Through this journey, forged by fire and sharpened by pain, the empath reaches a state Jung called individuation, a state where they no longer seek external approval to feel secure. They no longer rely on others to validate what they feel, see, or know. They no longer try to earn their worth. They embody it. But now comes the part that truly chills. Carl Jung identified a powerful psychological phenomenon called mirroring. Empaths naturally reflect what others project onto them. They've always been mirrors, absorbing, echoing, softening the energy around them. But when they've been wounded enough, something in that mirror changes. They stop simply reflecting, and they start revealing. They no longer absorb dysfunction. They expose it, not with cruelty, but with clarity. They see the charm for what it is, a mask. The apology as a tactic. The manipulation as a repeated script. And instead of absorbing the toxicity, they reflect back one thing narcissists cannot withstand: truth. And Jung believed that truth, seen clearly, spoken calmly, is the most devastating weapon against deception. Then comes the most powerful turning point of all, what Jung called the return of the repressed. Because when someone suppresses their true self for too long, when they shrink themselves to avoid conflict, when they say yes while screaming no inside, eventually, that self comes back, not in rage, but in clarity so sharp, it cuts through every illusion. The empath who used to bend, stretch, and accommodate suddenly becomes unshakable. They stop asking. They decide. They stop explaining. They act. They stop trying to fix what was never theirs to fix. They simply walk away, not out of spite, but because they've returned to themselves. This is individuation in motion, when the once fractured soul becomes whole. And here, Jung's psychology opens a fascinating door. The shadow doesn't just hold our darkness. It holds our unlived potential. For empaths, the shadow contains their strength to draw boundaries. Their voice that says, enough. Their ability to leave, to choose themselves. And betrayal? That's the fire that finally forces that potential into the light. To become whole, the empath must first reclaim what they once buried, the parts of themselves they were taught to suppress: anger, boundaries, discernment, even sacred self-regard. Carl Jung called this process shadow integration. It doesn't strip someone of their compassion. It sharpens it. They don't stop caring. They start caring intentionally. No longer bleeding energy into black holes of dysfunction. They begin to guard their empathy as something sacred, no longer an automatic offering, but a conscious gift. And from this process, something extraordinary emerges. The individuated self, a human being who knows who they are, what they value, and where their energy belongs. Once this state is reached, it's almost impossible to reverse. Because now, the empath is no longer reacting from wounds. They are living from wisdom. Jung once said the most dangerous people are not those driven by unconscious pain, but those who have faced that pain, learned from it, and transformed it. The awakened empath embodies this truth. They've tasted emotional cruelty and didn't crumble. They've endured betrayal, gaslighting, abandonment, and instead of staying small, they rose. Now, they can detect manipulation from a single phrase. They recognize emotional vampires because they've already been drained by them. They're not paranoid, they're informed. Jung called this discernment hard-earned through experience. And this, right here, is the turning point, because there comes a moment, according to Jung's theory of psychological development, when a person no longer searches outside of themselves for completion. Instead, they return to their own center. They become whole from within. For the betrayed empath, this moment isn't just personal, it's a revolution. They stop chasing approval. They stop justifying their needs. They stop watering dead plants. They step fully into what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the ability to govern one's emotional world with clarity, strength, and grace. And then comes the final, radiant transformation, what Jung described as the return to the self. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it is magnificent, because true strength, Jung discovered, is not the absence of feeling. It's sensitivity, refined through experience. It's the ability to feel deeply, yet choose wisely, to understand thoroughly, yet engage carefully, to forgive fully, but never forget the lesson. The fully awakened empath doesn't lose their tenderness, they refine it. They become gentle only with those who deserve it, and unflinchingly firm with those who require it. They've mastered what Jung called appropriate response, the art of choosing how, when, and if to respond at all. And here's what makes them truly untouchable. According to Jung, the highest level of psychological development occurs when a person no longer looks to others for completion. They no longer seek rescuers, nor do they play savior. The awakened empath doesn't isolate themselves from the world. They simply become discerning about where they place themselves within it. They no longer rescue people who enjoy drowning. They no longer run after those who always flee. They no longer pour their light into bottomless wells, hoping someone else will rise to meet them. Instead, they embody what Jung called the art of conscious relationship, engaging only when there is mutual respect, reciprocity, and real care. This is the final evolution. The individuated empath, not just powerful, transformational, not destructive, but unshakable. Carl Jung described these individuals as a force of nature, not because they seek to overpower others, but because they cannot be overpowered anymore. They don't need revenge. They've already transcended the desire for it. They don't need to prove anything. Their worth is no longer up for negotiation. They don't fear solitude. They've become excellent company for themselves. They are complete, not because they've closed themselves off, but because they've come home to every part of who they are. They've transformed their deepest wounds into their sharpest clarity. And now, they can no longer be manipulated, controlled, or broken. And that, as Carl Jung understood through a lifetime of research, is what truly terrifies those who once thought they had power over them. What the narcissist never anticipates is coming face to face with someone who has learned to love themselves just as fiercely as they once loved others. That's the empath's ultimate transformation. Not just healing, not just survival, but sovereignty. Carl Jung called this the hero's journey of the psyche. It's not metaphor. It's the inner odyssey of those who descend into darkness, confront their demons, embrace their shadows, and rise again, not broken, but blessed. The empath's journey is a sacred one. They don't just recover, they reclaim. They don't just patch the wounds. They integrate the power hidden inside them. And through this alchemy, something beautiful is born. Jung taught that suffering, when met consciously, not avoided, becomes the raw material for wisdom. The empath who has walked through emotional fire doesn't just come out burned. They come out glowing, refined, radiant. They become a light in the dark. A quiet, steady flame that helps others find their way through the fog of their own pain. They are living proof of one of Jung's most profound insights. That within every wound lies the seed of transcendence. That every betrayal, every heartbreak, every moment of abandonment, carries an invitation to rise, to return to the self, to become more authentic, more powerful, and more whole than ever before. This is the psychology of the awakened empath. Not loud, not flashy, but unshakable. And once you understand this transformation, once you truly grasp what it takes to turn pain into power, wounds into wisdom, and suffering into the purest kind of strength, you'll never again underestimate the silent strength of someone who has looked pain in the eye and decided to become something more because of it. Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration of the awakened empath. If this message spoke to you, or made you see yourself, or someone you love, in a new light, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this today. You never know, you might just be the light that leads them home. 2.